Hey guys, what's up? This is Alex Duque. Welcome back to the continuation of our tutorial. Now I just made a couple of simple primitives here. Just a helix and a polyplane. Just to explain, I'm gonna start talking about final gather. So whenever you go into final gather, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure you render with MentaArray, and you gotta make sure that you activate final gather. And you can activate that either by going into the features tab or by going into the indirect lighting tab. If you go into the features tab, that's where you can activate pretty much any feature such as final gather. So you can check it there, or you can go into indirect lighting and you'll find final gathering, which you can check here as well. The point here being is that if you check it under features and you need to change some settings for the final gathering, you can go into the indirect lighting and change the settings there. Now as far as the main settings for final gathering, and remember that final gathering is about materials pretty much, rather than focus on the light source. When it comes to final gathering, you have accuracy, density, and interpolation. Now I'm gonna use a little I'm gonna draw here on my UV. I'm just gonna draw here to explain what each one of those features mean, or like a quick, just a quick idea of what it means. The accuracy is pretty self-explanatory, so I don't need to necessarily explain that. But the less accuracy you have, the suckier it'll look. The more accuracy you have, the better it'll look. By default, it's at 100, which is not such a bad amount. But if you want, higher quality, you can go into like 500 or 1,000 even, which it sort of like depends. Just the more accuracy you have, the longer it will take to render. The point density is how many rays, if you want to think of it like that, how many rays of final gather are being computed. Right now it's like 1 ray per unit, if you want to think of it like that. The more density you have, the more points you have. So like with a density of 1, let's just think of it like this. You'll have like 1 ray every, let's say, every here. If you had more density, let's say, I don't know, 10, then you'll get like a lot more points per. So you're gonna have a denser amount of final gathering. Point interpolation is how it softens. Let's suppose we had like 1 point here and we had another point here. If that point interpolation is set to 10, which is by default, it's gonna try and soften out this one and that one, kind of like blur them. So the more point interpolation you have, the more blurring you'll have or merging between one and the other. So it can end up looking like just one constant soft amount of light or bounce light. If that's set to a very low quality, then you'll just see like points there. If you set it to a higher quality, then you'll get blending between those. Alright, so interpolation just stands for that, softening between 2 points. Okay, like a gradient between one and the other point. The primary diffuse scale and the secondary diffuse scale are just scale values, and then you have the amount of bounces that the secondary will do. Now, so once you have it activated, like I said, this works with materials. So I'm just going to start by assigning a couple of materials here. I'm going to make 2 Lamberts. I'm going to make one red and the other one white. Now, like I said, Final Gather has a lot of uses for it. So if I had a light, I'm going to make myself a little light rendering. Make myself a directional light here, and I'm going to put it, I don't know, kind of like that. So let's make a render and see what we get. Okay, not much there. A little bit, not much. So I'm going to give it a little bit more intensity and just activate the shadows so it looks nicer. Alright, So I got two objects. Now we don't have much to play with here. We got final gathering on. So I'm going to change for a second this coil, which I want to use for something else as far as an example goes. I'm just going to make myself a sphere. I'm going to assign that red material. So I'm going to assign the white to the sphere and the red to the floor, since there's more ground surface there. Create camera as well, because you know how I like to tumble, and I don't want the render to be tumbling every time. So alright, so we got a light source, which is casting light and shadows. We got ourselves a white sphere and a red plane. Now, as far as diffuse goes, then what you would get is a light that emits a light coming this way, and it's also coming this way, and it's also coming this way, right? And it's also coming that way. And then you have a surface or a whole bunch of surfaces that are going to bounce that light. So this would bounce it up with some white tone, and this would bounce it up with some red tones. Now I'm going to make them purple or green. So this would bounce it up as well, but that bounce would have red, and so will here, and so will there, and so on and so forth. So that would mean that this little sphere would have some of that red coming off of here, and maybe even a little bit of that red coming off of there. And at the same time, this white, or this red, might brighten up in some areas because of the white that's coming into it. That's the principle of Final Gather, which is just bounced light. Now if we make a render here, I'm going to render my camera 1, then we'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So with Final Gather, you can see that the object is, like I was saying, light is coming here and it's bouncing off in different directions, and some of that light that's bouncing is hitting here. Some of the light that's coming into here is also bouncing into different directions, and therefore it begins to shade part of this sphere with some of that red. Now we can't really see much of the white because there's really not much. It's like a really bright red, so you cannot see much of that white, but it's also happening there though. Now that is, like I said, one of the effects of Final Gather. So it's simulating the bounce of light based on the material information. And you know, if you made your material yellow, I'm going to make it green, then of course the bounce is going to be into the white surface is going to be red, is going to be green. So you can see what's happening there. You can really see the bounce of light there. Now that's one of the applications for Final Gather, where light hits the object and Final Gather will compute the bounce based on the material information. I'm going to add that light source to a layer. I'm going to make a render so everything will be black because there's no light. Now another use for Final Gather is when you have incandescent materials. Right now, again, if I make the render, everything's going to be black because none of these Lamberts have any sort of incandescence. I'm going to make a third Lambert, which I'm going to assign to the coil. If I wanted to make this Lambert incandescent, then you would change the incandescence value. I'm going to make it white. And hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit of bounce. See, this white surface, incandescent white, is like a light bulb, or like a neon light if you want to think of it, is shining some of that red green surface over there. And you can always, with an amount of 1, you can always increase the value. If I make it 8, then it's really going to bounce. So it'll be like really incandescent material. See? So that's another use for Final Gather, and that itself has a whole bunch of uses. Now I'm going to switch this up a little bit. I'm going to assign a white to the floor, and I'm going to change the color of my incandescent Lambert from a white incandescence to a red incandescence. So you can see how the amount of incandescence is red. And like I said, if this was white, then you would just see the white and white. So you would see the color of the surface underneath. Now you can see all these blotches over there, hopefully. This blotch, that blotch, and this blotch, and this blotch. Those have to do with a mixture between the render settings, as far as final gather goes, between the accuracy, the point density, and the interpolation. I'm going to keep the accuracy at 100. I'm going to take the density to 0.1. I'm going to keep this render. I'm going to render it again. So you can see that there's less density, so there's less points, and then you get, that's a lot of points. You can see there's a lot of blotches, and here there's less points, so there's less and bigger blotches. Make sense? If I had a point density of 10, let's keep this render, then I'm just going to get a lot of little blotches. And of course the render is also going to take longer. So we're just going to have to wait for a second. So there you go. So see, a lot of little blotches with a lot of point density. Not so many blotches, or less blotches, with a lower point density. And this is like with a mixture between both. Alright, so let me take that point density back to 1. Back to 1. I'll keep this render that has 10. So we get this amount of blotches. You can really see the blotches there. Now if you take the point interpolation and you lower that amount, then they're not going to soften up so much from one to the other. See, there you go. See how blotchy you see those? Like you actually see each one of those final gather rays. If you increase the point interpolation to 10, then, which is the default, then you're going to get some softening between one and the other. Like if you look at this point, for example, right there, you can see how it's trying to soften up. And if you give it even more of interpolation, then it's going to soften them up even more. So it's going to look a little bit softer. And if we compare this one with that one, you can see there's a big difference there. And you also have the accuracy, which will make it more accurate, or less accurate, of course. So if I keep it at 500 with a point density of 1 and a point interpolation of 60, and this render will take a little bit longer than what it used to take, but it's going to be it's going to have much more quality. Now most of these settings you will only see once you have animation. With still images it's not so noticeable. So why don't I go ahead and make a couple of renders, and I'll show you the video so that you can see what happens. So we'll be right back. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. Okay, so here's a render of this coil moving. Now I actually made it move so that you can see the changes throughout, so you can see what's going on. As far as the settings on this, it's a default. So it's an accuracy of 100, point density, let's just check. I got a bad memory. Accuracy of 100, point density of 1, and point interpolation of 10. So you can see how like those guys are like really moving around like crazy. Now the ways to fix that are usual. I'm on draft settings, okay, but regardless, the ways to fix that would be by increasing this, and that all together. It usually takes tweaking to know exactly what you want so that you can get the least amount of switching around. But let's try the following settings. I'm going to make the same render again, and I'm going to change some settings and see how that render turns out. Change the point interpolation to 60, I'm going to keep the density at 1 because I don't want too many. There's really not much to have so many. And I'm going to increase the accuracy to 500. So we got a good amount of accuracy, so it's going to soften it up. We don't have that many, which is good because that way the interpolation is going to be between one and the other. And this seems to be just about a good amount of size for those guys. So I'm going to make another render, and this one's going to take a little bit, so I'm just going to pause the tutorial right here and come back once the render is done. Hey guys, welcome back. Okay, render is finally done. So let me go ahead and open it. And let's see what we get. There's still some bouncing there. You can still see how it's changing over time. And you know, if I want it to be really soft and really smooth, I would have to really crank up those values, but then the render would take forever. I'll just give you more or less an idea. This render took from, let's see, 920 to 933, so it's 13 minutes. This render was 13, or let me just open it. Open animation, there we go. And I'm also going to open up the other animation so you can also compare. Now keep in mind a couple of things. First of all, I'm rendering with draft settings, although that doesn't really affect anything in regards to the final gather. But it's still coming out relatively quick because of that. Okay, so the first render, which you see here, which is really noisy, took 6 minutes for 90 frames. Okay, 6 minutes, 90 frames, no lights on the scene, only final gather and draft settings. 6 minutes. This render, which looks relatively better, there's still some of that bouncing there, but it looks better, took 13 minutes to do the same 90 frames. So this one's already taken a long time, and this one's taking a lot longer. You know, that render would have taken a lot shorter if there was no final gather. It would probably take like a minute. No, 2 minutes or something to render it under the settings that it has. So just keep in mind this render over here was 6 minutes total, 90 frames, and this render was 13 minutes for the same 90 frames. Alright, so let's do double the amount, and if it was a normal render it would have taken, I'm guessing here, but it would have taken about 2 minutes for 90 frames. So there's a big difference from here to there and from here to there. Now keep in mind as well that final gather is made to help compute the bounce of light. It's not necessarily directed at replacing a light source, although it can be used for that, but it would take forever to render. So it'd be smarter to actually have a light source, and actually if you had a light source, then a lot of that effect under this settings would be softened. So as I said, final gather is made mainly to give you the effect of bounced light. So what would be a proper use of final? There would be a couple of proper uses for final gather. I'm going to make this material back to that green. I'm going to make that render, which is going to be black, and let me crank those values down. Accuracy 100 and 10. It's back to default. Alright, so we get black. So what would be, there's a couple of proper uses for final gather. The first one would be, I'm going to make myself, you know what, let's actually show this and hide this guy. And let's make the ground green. I'm going to desaturate it a little bit. It's a more subtler, forget it, let's make it red. Really saturated red. And then you have that white surface. So it's going to be black because there's no lights around it. If we go ahead and show our light, then we're going to get something that looks like this, where again the red is bouncing onto that surface. But like I said, a proper or better use for Final Gather would be in the case that you had what's called a dome. A dome is simply a sphere that does not cast shadows. Alright? It doesn't necessarily need to, if it's not going to cast, then it might as well not receive shadows. And that dome would be incandescent. I'm going to start very simple here, and instead of assigning the Lambert that had the incandescence value, I'm going to make a surface shader. Surface shader can be thought of as an incandescent by nature, incandescent shader. So if I make the out color of that dome like that, I'm just going to make it big. And actually I'm going to change the color from white to blue so you can see some of the bouncing that's going to do. Then you have a white. In this case it's just casting white light, light with shadows, and you have a dome, and you have this. So the dome is incandescent because it's got that surface shader. Now here in your sphere, now you can see some of the bounce of that quote-unquote environment. So I hope that makes some sense to you. Let's make everything white for a second so you can really see the bounce. So you can see everything's really bright, and in the shadows you're getting the blue, and in the dark area you're also getting the blue, and in the bounce of the underside of the sphere you're getting some of that white. I'm going to decrease, I think my light's a little bit too intense, so I'm just going to decrease it back to 1. Let's see how that looks. Okay, there we go. So we can see a little bit more of that effect. Because if it's too intense, it's going to blow everything out. I'm actually going to take it to 0.8. Okay, so you really get a sense of the bounce. You can see this is theoretically white, but it's actually now blue because that environment is blue. So the use of that dome would be to assign a surface shader to it, and on that surface shader, you know, to keep it simple, you can map a color like this, or you can map a texture. And if you had any like a panoramic, then that would be a great idea. But I'm not gonna go there yet. I'm just gonna make myself a ramp and make a really simple sky, because that's what that dome is supposed to simulate. It's supposed to simulate an environment, like for example if you're outside, like the sky. Keep in mind that you can always change the value so that it casts, so it's more intense. If you look at this here on the perspective view, that's how that dome looks like. So it's if it's black, that means it's not casting any light from underneath, or it's not, you know, irradiating light from underneath. It's just radiating light from outside. This would be white, and that would be blue, and a gradient throughout, plus our original light source. If we go ahead and make a render, we're gonna get a softer type of shade where it still has some of that blue, but it still has a lot of the white that's coming off of the environment. And you know, as you keep playing with this, then I'm just gonna go ahead and assign red here and see what happens. Let's see, hopefully we'll get a little bit of bounce there. Not so much, but probably a little bit of bounce of that red underneath. Let's make it the other way, see what happens. Assign the white there, and assign the red here. I'm just gonna desaturate that red. You know, because in real life, and I'm not gonna make it red, I'm gonna make it green. In real life, objects will not be as saturated as that. So there we go. You can get some of that effect, and you can really have a sense of the bounce of light. You are getting some of the green down here. You can see some of the green like right around this area, and you can see some of the blue around that area on the white surface, plus the direct illumination that's coming off of there. It's coming off of here. So that's one of the uses for Final Gather. As I said, it's to have a little dome environment, and I'm just going to make this plane really big, and I'm going to change my perspective and have it kind of like from here, and this time I'm just going to render the perspective. And you can really get a sense again of that bounce. You got the indirect lighting, you got the bounce of light, you got the bounce of the seal of the sky, you got the bounce of the ground into that white surface, and so on and so forth. But again, this is all based on materials. Probably another effect of this would be a little bit different. Now this time, let me just save this scene. Oops. Now another effect of Final Gather, again because it's all about the bounce of light, would be in the case that, let's say you had a little environment here. Just gonna give that a face, Poly Modeling Tools. So let's suppose that that would be a window. Oh great. Let me just change the setting here so it doesn't preserve the UVs. So there's a window. I'm just going to extrude this out, or no, I'm just going to extract it out so that it's a separate object. And there we go. Call this window, call these walls, look through a camera. So I'm just going to create a camera and in perspective, camera 1. I'm going to widen up this camera a little bit, its focal length. Just going to put it over here and change the shape of my object. So that the camera is inside. And what else? I'm going to make an object inside of this. I don't know what would look nice. Probably this one. No, this one's probably gonna look nice. So nothing fancy. And again, I have Final Gather right now is probably not activated because I made a new scene. So I'm just gonna go ahead and activate it with default settings. And if another effect, like as I was saying, is if you had a direct light source, such as, let's say this, a little directional light, so it's got light coming in from the side, and I'm just going to hide this for a second and give some ray trace shadows to this direct light source. I'm going to soften them up a little bit, 5 and 20. I'm still rendering under preview or draft settings, so it's going to be a little sucky, but we are getting this, which is just direct lighting. Or let's take off the Final Gathering. There we go. So that would be just direct lighting, and if that would be the window, then, and let's just suppose for a second that it's an overcast day, and you can either have something outside, a dome outside of this, which is definitely an option, but since the light would be coming in through the window, then we can just make a surface shader and assign it to that window. I'm just going to make it white. Now this would be direct lighting only, and it would look like that. I'm also going to make another Lambert here, which I'm going to assign to that ground, and I'm going to make it white, and then another Lambert which I'm going to assign to that object, and I'm going to make it red. Alright, so again, direct lighting only, we're only going to get that. Now because the light is coming through that window, then we don't want this window to cast shadows, since theoretically it's transparent, and it's giving us, just with direct light, an effect of the light coming in from that window. But as you can see, there's none of that bounce. Once you activate final gathering, then it's going to sum up the incandescent shader plus the light source, and then the bounce of that light throughout this environment. And then you can see the effect of the bounce of the direct light hitting this object and bouncing back down here. And you can also see the effect of all this light plus a little bit of that light just bouncing off into the environment around, which is giving us all this cool looking shading. Alright, now again, this is kept in really simple terms, but that's pretty much how it works. So that would be one application of final gathering, and yeah, that would be a good application of that. And the other one was the one that I already talked about, which is having that dome that doesn't cast shadows. Alright, so that pretty much takes care of the basics of Final Gather. The rest is experimentation and all that stuff. You know, keep in mind that because it's Final Gather, then you can map anything. I'm just gonna do something crazy here. I'm gonna map a ramp onto that surface shader's color. Oops, 6. And I'm gonna change the placement of this to a U ramp, and just none. Just two colors, red and green, so it's going to be really crazy. Might have to change the value so that you can really see a change, but let's see what happens. So because it is Final Gather and it is based on the material information, then you can see that there's green on this area. I'm going to keep this image. There's green on this area, and then there is red on that area. I hope you can see it. And again, because it's based on material, so if I animated this through time, then as it goes changing, then the Final Gather will be changing color as well. So now there's a lot more red and green, and therefore you would get a lot of that red over there. Alright, so if you compare, then you can see what's happening there, how it's changing over time, and you can see some of the little things that change as well. If you look at this wall, you'll see how it's red in here and it's green on there. Alright, so I hope this tutorial made a little bit of sense to you. I tend to complicate things. That's why I try to keep them simple, because I end up complicating them more than what they are. But the point here is experiment with Final Gather. Keep in mind that Final Gather focuses on the materials and not the light source, and that is the main difference between to compute the bounce of light, and that is the main difference between Final Gather and global illumination. The next tutorial will talk about global illumination, and then after that I'll just make a little extra note, which is that if you use one, then you want to use sort of like both to get the best effect as possible. Alright, so till next time, see ya, bye bye.